My stepmother-in-law, Veronica, who couldn't have children of her own, has been calling my baby daughter her little girl and praying over her crib. When I tried to set some boundaries, she had a complete breakdown, broke into our house, and threatened self-harm. I desperately need advice on how to handle this situation that's spiraling out of control. I apologize for the length of this post, but I need to give you the full picture. Veronica is generally a lovely woman, kind, helpful, and sweet. But lately, I swear my nursing training is the only thing keeping me from completely losing it with her. The way she's acting around my baby has crossed so many lines, and my patience is wearing dangerously thin. Warren, my father-in-law, married Veronica when my husband Ethan was still a teenager, so they've been together for quite a while now. She worked as a nurse for many years until her struggles with infertility became too emotionally taxing to continue. After countless failed IVF attempts and a devastating miscarriage, they discovered they couldn't have children. Looking back, I suspect one of the benefits of marrying Warren, a respected retired pediatrician, was that she would inherit two stepsons, even if they were nearly adults. I imagine she consoled herself with the thought that one day they would have children, and she'd finally get to be a grandmother. This brings me to our current situation. When I was pregnant with Harper, my medical background told me to expect some boundary issues. There hasn't been a girl born into the family for generations, and everyone was excited. But as a nurse who's seen my fair share of family dynamics around newborns, even I wasn't prepared for how intense this would get. During my pregnancy, Veronica showed up at our modest home with 4 enormous bags full of baby clothes, despite my specific request for no one to buy clothing. I had practical reasons. Babies outgrow things so quickly, making it a waste of money, especially with our tight budget while I'm still paying off nursing school loans. Plus, I'd noticed that my in-laws have this annoying habit of buying clothes with sayings like "Grandma's special angel" or "Daddy's little princess," the kind of possessive language that makes my skin crawl. When I explained to Veronica that I'd learned from my experience with Lucas, my son, and that I wouldn't even have family waiting in the delivery room this time, she nodded and said, "I understand completely, dear." But Warren later told me that she cried herself to sleep for an entire week, clutching a baby blanket she'd knitted. My heart ached hearing this. I genuinely have a good relationship with her, but it also felt manipulative, like I was being guilted for setting a perfectly reasonable boundary. I sat her down at our kitchen table one evening after my hospital shift and gently explained that this wasn't about excluding her from Harper's life. "You'll be involved, Veronica. I promise. I just need some space in these early days." She seemed to understand, squeezing my hand with tears in her eyes. But the past year has proven otherwise, and things have gone from concerning to downright frightening. Let me break down some of the disturbing behaviors I've been witnessing. During family gatherings, she constantly refers to Harper as my precious little angel or grandma's special gift. Last week, during Sunday dinner, she must have used possessive terms at least 15 times, while barely acknowledging Lucas's existence. My 4-year-old son noticed, asking me later why Nana only likes the baby. My mother, who was visiting from England, was the first to point out how unsettling Veronica's behavior had become. One afternoon, I walked into Harper's nursery to find Veronica hovering over the crib, her hands spread out above my sleeping daughter as she whispered intensely, "You are the child I have prayed for, my little girl. God has truly answered my prayers by bringing you to me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't the prayer itself, but the desperate possessiveness in her voice. During Harper's baptism, Veronica tried to convince us to give our daughter the middle name Grace, the name she had chosen years ago for the baby she miscarried. When I explained that we'd already chosen Harper's full name, she looked crushed and said, "But I got to help name her first name, didn't I?" Which wasn't even true. Later, I overheard her telling church friends that she had named our daughter. Perhaps the most disturbing incident happened when she was holding Harper during a family photo. She gazed at her and said, "She's so beautiful. She got that from you, Megan." It's such a shame. I always wanted to see my own features on my child. Maybe we can just say she has my eyes? I was so shocked I couldn't even respond. Ethan saw my face and quickly changed the subject, but the moment haunted me for days. Whenever Harper makes the slightest noise, Veronica transforms into an Olympic sprinter. She'll literally push past me, her own mother, to scoop her up, cooing, "Sha, I'm here now, my angel. You're okay. Nothing can hurt you when Grandma's here." As a nurse, I find this particularly infuriating. Not only is she undermining my role as a mother, but she's also creating unhealthy attachments and responses in my daughter. The guilt trips are relentless. Despite knowing that I'm reluctant to have my children sleep at others' homes while they're so young, she asks at least twice a week, "Can I have Harper over for the night?" I'll explain why not, and she'll immediately counter with, "What about next weekend then?" Recently, she's escalated to making pointed statements while staring me down. I've set up the most beautiful nursery at our house with a medical-grade air purifier, and she hasn't even used it once. The way she looks at me when she says these things sends chills down my spine. I'm at my wit's end. Sometimes I wish she would just be straightforward with her demands like my mother-in-law, because at least then I could address them directly. This passive-aggressive approach leaves me feeling constantly on edge during my precious time off from the hospital. I understand her grief. In my nursing career, I've worked with many women struggling with infertility and pregnancy loss. I genuinely feel for her pain. But that doesn't give her the right to try claiming my daughter as the baby she never had. Despite everything, I know Veronica has been there for our family in many ways. She's brought meals when I've had long shifts, and she was genuinely supportive during my difficult pregnancy with Harper. But since the birth, her behavior has become increasingly obsessive and controlling. Ethan loves his father and Veronica, and Warren absolutely cannot bear to see his wife upset. I'm worried that if Ethan and I try to address this formally, she'll dissolve into tears and make us the villains. I've tried gentle corrections in the moment, but they're either ignored or met with that wounded look that makes me feel like I've kicked a puppy. As someone who's trained to handle medical emergencies with composure, I find myself completely unprepared for dealing with these emotional manipulations. What should I do? How do I protect my children and my sanity while minimizing the emotional fallout? Update 1. My post was getting extremely long, so I'm writing this update separately. To put it bluntly, everything completely fell apart. I had initially planned to wait until Friday when Veronica, Warren, Nathan, and his family were scheduled to visit. My naive nurse brain thought this would be a simple, pull her aside for a quick chat situation. But after reading your comments and concerns, I realized I needed to address this immediately. Several of you shared stories that terrified me, particularly the person who linked to The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. As a mother, that film clip chilled me to my core. It was difficult to accept that my situation might be heading in such a disturbing direction. Let me give you a rundown of last night's events. When Ethan came home from work, I completely broke down the moment I saw him. I rarely cry. My nursing training has taught me to stay composed during crises, so the shock on his face was evident. Even if he hadn't fully grasped the severity of the Veronica situation before, my emotional state made it crystal clear. I poured out everything. All the moments I'd briefly mentioned but never detailed, because I wanted our limited time together to be positive. The words rushed out like I was reporting critical patient symptoms during an emergency. "It's worse than I've been letting on," I told him, wiping tears with my scrub sleeve. "The pet names she uses are getting more possessive. She constantly tries to hold Harper, literally rushing past me to get to her when she cries. Remember all those baby clothes she bought despite my requests? And that nursery she's set up at their house with medical grade everything? I described the disturbing way Veronica whispers into Harper's ear, things I can't quite hear, but that make Harper stare at her with wide eyes. I mentioned the photo album filled with pictures of Harper. She has more photos than I do, Ethan, and I'm her mother. The subtle look of satisfaction when Harper reaches for her. The sad statements designed to make me feel guilty. And the looks, I added, suddenly remembering something crucial. When I'm holding Harper, she gives me this strange expression. It's like a mixture of sadness, jealousy, anger, and something else I can't quite name. It's unnerving, like she's calculating something. I finished by sharing what many of you had pointed out. Veronica never properly addressed her grief over her infertility and miscarriage, and it has manifested into an unhealthy obsession with Harper. This attachment is damaging not only to Harper and Lucas, who's clearly noticing the difference in attention, but to Veronica's own mental health as well. I do care about her, I emphasized, my nursing instincts kicking in. But this attachment is far more serious than we thought. We need to talk to both Veronica and Warren together, because I'm genuinely frightened about where this might lead. Ethan listened intently, his IT engineer's mind processing everything methodically. When I finished, he simply hugged me, and I completely broke down, crying harder than I have since moving to America. Through my tears, he explained that he'd always known Veronica hadn't properly processed her grief. He shared a few incidents from his teenage years that now made perfect sense. My father needs to understand that his primary responsibility is to get Veronica the help she needs, Ethan said firmly. And my primary concern is you and our children. Dad needs to respect that. He suggested we speak with them together, as Warren would likely dismiss the concerns if approached separately. We developed a comprehensive plan, my nursing background and his systematic thinking creating a solid approach. We'd start from a place of genuine concern rather than accusation, gradually addressing our specific issues. We would clearly outline our boundaries, emphasizing that they weren't negotiable. Any violation would demonstrate a lack of respect for our parental authority and would have consequences. We'd then circle back to concern for Veronica's mental health and grief processing. My friend Jessica, a social worker who went through a miscarriage herself, had recommended her therapist. We'd offer emotional support alongside professional help. Even if she agrees to respect our boundaries, I told Ethan, my clinical experience informing my opinion, she needs therapy. If she can't project these feelings onto Harper, she'll internalize them, causing herself more psychological damage. I'm genuinely concerned for her well-being. Ethan agreed completely. We were prepared with notes, unified in our approach. The children were sleeping peacefully. I had composed myself. Then I got a text from Warren saying they wanted to come for dinner tomorrow instead of Friday due to a church event. My anxiety spiked, but at least we could face this sooner rather than later. Everything was set. I had Ethan's complete support. Veronica is usually quite rational. What could possibly go wrong? As it turns out, absolutely everything. Update 2. I need to start by saying this happened just hours ago. I'm still in shock and overwhelmed. As a nurse, I've dealt with many crisis situations, but nothing in my training prepared me for this level of personal chaos. Please forgive any disjointed thoughts or errors. This morning, while getting ready for my hospital shift, my hands were trembling, and I felt a knot in my stomach, the same feeling I get before a particularly difficult patient case. My body was warning me that something was about to go terribly wrong. My entire workday dragged on endlessly, my mind constantly returning to the impending conversation. Veronica and Warren live in their upscale home about 30 minutes away, and they're meticulously punctual. After work, I picked up Lucas and Harper from daycare, got them settled at home, and started preparing dinner while Ethan finished up a remote work meeting. We planned to have our discussion after the children were in bed. When the doorbell rang, Ethan answered while I was in the kitchen. As they entered, Veronica immediately spotted Harper in my arms and made a beeline toward us, arms outstretched. "My darling angel," she exclaimed with an intense smile. "You're getting so big. Come to Nana." Her fingers were actually twitching with eagerness to take Harper. I maintained a professional composure, the same I use with difficult patients. "Actually, Veronica, could you help me in the kitchen?" I handed Harper to Ethan instead. The flash of hurt and anger on her face was unmistakable, but she recovered quickly and followed me. During dinner, she barely touched her food, focusing entirely on Harper, who was happily making a mess with her pasta. Veronica cooed and fussed over every little thing Harper did, completely ignoring Lucas. "Veronica, your food is getting cold," I observed, noticing how Warren was watching his wife's behavior with growing discomfort. "It's fine," she replied in that baby talk voice that makes my skin crawl. "My precious princess is being a little fussy. She needs special attention, doesn't she?" She reached over to touch Harper's cheek possessively. "She's actually perfectly content," I replied, my nursing assertiveness coming through. "She's enjoying exploring her food independently. You should try to enjoy your meal too." "Nonsense," she dismissed, though she did reluctantly start eating. After dinner, despite Veronica's protests about just one more cuddle, we put the children to bed. When I came back downstairs, I overheard her speaking to Ethan and Warren. "Megan seems very tense today," she was saying with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Is she all right?" I stepped forward before Ethan could respond. "Actually, Veronica, we've been wanting to speak with all of you." The color drained from her face in an instant. It was unsettling how quickly her expression changed, something I've only seen in patients experiencing severe shock. I sat beside Ethan, facing Veronica and Warren across our coffee table. Taking a deep breath, I called on my years of delivering difficult news to patients. "I hope you won't take this as an attack, because we're genuinely concerned about this situation," I began carefully. "Since Harper was born, we've noticed a significant change in your behavior, Veronica. You've shifted from being a warm, loving grandmother to Lucas to adopting what seems like a maternal role with Harper. We want to be clear about our positions in her life." Before I could finish, Veronica began weeping dramatically. The timing felt calculated, like a patient trying to avoid a difficult conversation about their health choices. I handed her a tissue, maintaining my professional demeanor. "I'll continue. We have established boundaries that have been repeatedly crossed, perhaps unintentionally, but crossed nonetheless. We need to redefine them clearly. I am Harper's mother, Veronica. When she cries, and I'm right there, it's inappropriate for you to rush past me to pick her up. Sometimes babies need to express themselves without immediate intervention. That's part of healthy development. Harper is our daughter, not yours." Her weeping intensified. Warren looked increasingly annoyed, his physician's authority clearly challenged by this conversation. I continued with practiced calmness, keeping my voice level, the way I do when explaining difficult medical news to patients. "Please stop referring to Harper as your little girl, your princess, or any similar terms. You are her grandmother, a wonderful one, but you need to understand and respect your role. The constant photographing needs to stop too. You can enjoy a moment with Harper without documenting everything. And the repeated requests for FaceTime sessions immediately after you've just seen her have become excessive." I could see Veronica becoming increasingly agitated, her former nurse's composure cracking visibly with each word. Ethan jumped in, his voice gentle but firm. "Veronica, I can see you're getting upset. And Dad, I know this is difficult for you too. But our primary concern has to be our children, and we're genuinely worried about Veronica's well-being. She's developed what appears to be an unhealthy attachment to Harper, and we believe she needs to address the underlying grief that's driving this behavior. We know this is painful to hear, but until she gets professional help, we don't feel comfortable with her being alone with Harper. That was the breaking point. Veronica, who had been weepy while Warren looked increasingly annoyed, suddenly transformed. She leapt to her feet with a speed that startled all of us, her face contorted with rage. "You can't take her away from me," she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch I'd never heard from her. "She's all I have. I love that little girl. I would never hurt her. Why are you doing this to me, Megan? After everything I've done for you, I've been the mother-in-law that Ethan's biological mother never was. And this is how you repay me? By stealing my little girl." Her medical background emerged in her perfectly articulated fury. "I don't have issues. I couldn't have children of my own, and God Himself blessed me with this family. Harper is the answer to my prayers, and now you're trying to take her from me." Before any of us could respond, she bolted from the room, screaming Harper's name as she headed toward the stairs. We sat frozen in shock for a split second. As a nurse, I've witnessed emotional breakdowns before, but nothing prepared me for this level of derangement from someone I trusted with my children. I snapped into emergency mode, jumping up and racing after her. I managed to get ahead of her and physically blocked her access to the staircase, shouting for Ethan. Veronica was weeping hysterically, her face twisted in a way that made her unrecognizable. Drawing on every ounce of my professional training, I pushed her back firmly and said, "You need to leave. Now. Get out of my house before you wake up the children with this behavior." My voice was surprisingly steady and authoritative, the same tone I used during hospital emergencies, despite the adrenaline surging through my system. She looked at me with wide, wild eyes before collapsing dramatically, grabbing onto my ankles and wailing incomprehensibly. Her nursing training had completely evaporated, replaced by raw desperation. I stood rigidly in place, horrified but determined to protect my sleeping children upstairs. Ethan and Warren finally caught up to us, their faces reflecting the same shock I was feeling. Ethan carefully pried Veronica's fingers from around my ankles and lifted her nearly limp body. She immediately latched onto his face, her fingers digging into his cheeks as she sobbed, "Please, Ethan. I'll do whatever you want. I'll follow all your rules. Just please don't take her away from me. She's my little girl." Her voice broke on those last words, revealing the depth of her delusion. Ethan looked at his father over Veronica's shoulder, his expression grim. "Dad, she needs help. Professional help, more than any of us can provide." The IT specialist in him recognized a system failure that required expert intervention. Warren finally seemed to snap out of his stunned trance. The retired physician took Veronica's hand, murmuring medical terms to calm her as he guided her toward the door. She continued sobbing as they left, her voice trailing behind them. "Please, please, please, Megan, please." The door closed, and we heard their car pull away. I raced upstairs to check on the children, my heart pounding. Both Lucas and Harper were miraculously still asleep, their peaceful faces a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. I stood watching them breathe for a long moment, using the techniques I teach anxious patients to calm my own racing pulse. Back downstairs, I sank onto the stairs, emotionally drained. Ethan joined me, silently taking my hand. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like an eternity, both processing the terrifying scene we just witnessed. My nursing training had prepared me for many things, but not for this violation of trust within our family. Finally, my professional instincts kicked in. I called our daycare provider to inform her that under no circumstances should the children be released to anyone but Ethan or myself, regardless of past arrangements. We reviewed our home security system, grateful for the cameras and passcodes that Ethan, with his technical expertise, had installed. I emailed my supervisor at the hospital, explaining I wouldn't be in for my shift tomorrow. As both my boss and friend, she would understand that I needed time to process this family crisis. Sleep seemed impossible after what we'd just experienced. I felt completely adrift. My training prepares me to help others through crisis, but nothing prepared me for this personal storm. Update 3. So much has happened since that night. I've wanted to update sooner, but events kept spiraling, creating one massive emotional hurricane after another. I've had to skip many details just to maintain my sanity. Your support and advice have been invaluable through all of this, and I'm deeply grateful to everyone who has checked in on us. After the confrontation, things were eerily quiet for several days. We didn't hear directly from Veronica or Warren, but Nathan informed us that his father was handling the situation. I took this to mean Warren was finally getting Veronica the professional help she so desperately needed. Ethan texted his father expressing our relief that Veronica would be receiving proper care, emphasizing there was no shame in seeking mental health support. We explained that while we remained concerned for her well-being, recent events necessitated limiting contact, with no unsupervised visits with the children until significant improvement was evident. Warren's simple reply, "I understand and thank you," seemed promising. I took some time off from my nursing shifts, partly due to anxiety, and partly because we were in the process of hiring a nanny, something we'd already planned before this crisis. Despite the dramatic breakdown, I naively believed the situation was under control. My clinical training should have prepared me better for what came next. With Mother's Day approaching, I initially didn't want to leave the house, feeling vulnerable after everything that had happened. Ethan planned a special celebration, however, and eventually convinced me we should go ahead with it. Strangely, I felt a pang of guilt about Veronica, remembering how we had always celebrated with her in previous years. My nursing compassion kicked in, imagining how difficult this day must be for her. Mother's Day morning, I laid out my makeup on the bathroom counter before taking a shower. When I returned, several products were missing. Being a busy nurse and mother, I assumed I'd simply misplaced them or forgotten to put them out. It wouldn't be the first time stress had affected my memory. After searching fruitlessly, I used alternative products and spare brushes. It seemed odd, but not alarming enough to raise red flags. Ethan, the children, and I left for a Mother's Day brunch at a restaurant about 15 minutes from our home. The place was bustling with families celebrating. As we settled at our table, I noticed it was colder than I'd anticipated. "I should grab jackets for the kids," I told Ethan. "The food will probably arrive by the time I get back." When I pulled into our driveway, my nursing instincts immediately signaled something was wrong. The utility door near our recycling bins was slightly ajar. It doesn't have a lock, so I initially thought the wind might have pushed it open, though something felt off. When I went to close it, I noticed an overturned trash bin. My clinical alarm bells rang louder. That bin was full. No way the wind knocked it over. I remained outwardly calm while my inner assessments ran through potential scenarios. Moving cautiously to the front door, I unlocked it and stepped inside, shutting it quietly behind me. My heart was racing with the same intensity I feel during hospital emergencies. Part of me thought I was overreacting, but my medical training has taught me to trust those warning signals. I climbed the stairs, passing Lucas's room, and grabbed his little jacket. As I approached Harper's room, the sight that greeted me froze my blood in a way that nothing in my nursing career had prepared me for. Harper's clothes were meticulously arranged in rows across the floor, not folded, but laid out in complete outfits with matching shoes and accessories, like a disturbing retail display. And there, sitting cross-legged among them, was Veronica. My professional composure shattered. "What the hell are you doing here?" I gasped. She rose with unsettling quickness and sighed as if I was the one who'd kept her waiting. "Thank God you're here, Megan," she said with practiced nurse-like calmness. "I came to celebrate Mother's Day with the children, but no one was home. I couldn't decide which outfit would look best on Harper, so I laid them all out to visualize properly." For a moment, I questioned my own sanity. I instinctively reached for my phone to call Ethan, but Veronica lunged forward with surprising agility and snatched it from my hand. "No, no, we don't need to bother him," she said with a smile that made my clinical mind flash to patients with severe psychiatric breaks. Her expression held no warmth, just a dangerous vacancy that I recognized from my most unstable patients. I was torn between two responses: the primal urge to physically remove this threat from my home, and my professional understanding that she was mentally unwell, vulnerable, and clearly unstable. The nurse in me won out momentarily. "Veronica," I said firmly, using the authoritative tone I reserve for combative patients, "you need to leave immediately. We're no contact right now. You are not supposed to be here." Her face contorted. "But it's Mother's Day," she protested, her former clinical rationality completely gone. "It's the day God meant for mothers and their children. I should be with my baby." My professional patience snapped. "She is not your daughter," I stated unequivocally. "I am her mother. Harper is my daughter. You aren't even biologically related to her." I grabbed my phone back from her slackened grip. I started down the stairs to call Ethan from a safer distance, Veronica sobbing dramatically behind me. Years of nursing had taught me to recognize genuine distress versus manipulation, and this ping-ponged between both. I reached Ethan and explained the situation as calmly as I could. He wanted to return immediately, but I didn't want the children exposed to this scene. "Drop Lucas and Harper at Amelia's house first, then come," I instructed, my crisis management skills taking over. Veronica was screaming over my shoulder now, her medical training completely overwhelmed by delusion. "Megan, is that Ethan? Is he bringing Harper? I knew you'd understand eventually. This was just a misunderstanding. Babies belong with their mothers." She began laughing in a way that sent chills through me, the kind of laugh I've only heard in severe psychiatric cases. "You're completely delusional," I stated, my clinical assessment impossible to suppress. "I can never allow you around my children again. You broke into our house. Who does that? I'm calling the police." Veronica's sobbing intensified. "You can't. We're family. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're trying to keep her from me." Her nursing rationality had completely vanished. Part of me wanted to physically subdue her as I would an out-of-control patient, but the more rational part knew this required professional intervention. As I dialed 911, I turned back toward her and confronted a scene from my worst nightmares. Veronica stood there with two kitchen knives, one pressed against each temple. My medical training cataloged the immediate dangers: carotid arteries, temporal vessels, potential blood loss rates, even as my maternal instincts screamed in horror. "I can't live without my baby," she sobbed, her medical knowledge guiding her hands to the most dangerous positions. "If I can't have her, there's no point." I instantly shifted to crisis de-escalation mode, speaking with the measured calm I use with suicidal patients. "Veronica, please put those down. Let's talk about this." But inside, I was terrified, both as a nurse who recognized the genuine danger and as a mother facing this nightmare. "This world is too painful without her," she wailed, pressing the blades closer. "Too evil." Tears streamed down my face as I maintained my professional demeanor, knowing that with her nursing background, she knew exactly how to cause maximum harm. I begged and pleaded using techniques from my training, but realized with clinical clarity that only one thing would make her stop. "Think about Harper," I said, hating myself for using my child this way, but seeing no alternative. How will she manage without her grandmother? She needs you in her life. Veronica's grip on the knives loosened. She whimpered pathetically and finally dropped them. I immediately kicked them away and secured them as the police arrived, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The rest of that day exists in fragments in my memory, the way traumatic shifts at the hospital sometimes blur together. Ethan arrived, followed by Warren and Nathan. I remember screaming at Warren, my professional composure finally shattering. "You're a doctor. How could you let this happen? You're weak and cowardly. She needs to be in a psychiatric facility, not coddled." I regretted my tone later, but in that moment, I was both a terrified mother and an outraged healthcare professional watching preventable harm unfold. Veronica was placed on psychiatric hold, where she remains now. Neither Ethan nor I have visited her, though Amelia reported that during the first day, Veronica repeatedly screamed, "Let me die," and cried for Harper continuously. It's been a week, and I'm told she's showing improvement, though my nursing experience makes me cautious about such early assessments. I'm struggling with conflicting emotions. As a nurse, I understand she's unwell and needs treatment. As a mother, I know our relationship is irreparably damaged. I feel guilt accompanied by the clinical knowledge that her unpredictable nature makes her fundamentally unsafe around my children. Being British but living in America compounds the isolation. I have no immediate family nearby for support. Fortunately, Jessica, my close friend, who's like a sister, lives just 10 minutes from our apartment in another state. The children and I will stay there for a few weeks while we process this trauma. We're also looking at permanent relocation options. This entire experience has been beyond anything my professional or personal life prepared me for. I can only hope the worst is behind us. Update 4. Everyone has been asking for updates, so here's the latest. Veronica, I think we can stop with the smile designation now, has been released from the psychiatric hospital. According to Amelia, her acute delusions have subsided, but she's deeply depressed as she confronts the reality of her situation and actions. She's attending regular therapy sessions, which my nursing background tells me is essential for any real recovery. The court granted our restraining order without hesitation. We consulted with our lawyers about pressing breaking and entering charges, but the legal complexities proved more challenging than anticipated. From both a legal standpoint and my medical perspective, we ultimately decided that mental health treatment would be more beneficial than criminal prosecution. We've completely overhauled our home security system with new locks, codes, and monitoring that covers the entire property. All this happened the same day we listed our house for sale, a heartbreaking decision, as it was my dream home, but too many traumatic associations have tainted it. Additionally, Warren and Veronica live just 20 minutes away, which is far too close for comfort. The children and I are temporarily staying at our apartment in another state. Veronica has never visited this location and doesn't know the address. My friends in the healthcare community have been incredibly supportive, and my sister has flown over from England to help us through this transition. Taking no chances, I've provided the building's security staff with Veronica's picture and clear instructions. We've finalized our will, a process we'd already begun to ensure Warren and Veronica would never become guardians of our children. I want to clarify something from my previous post. When I express concern for Veronica, it's not forgiveness or minimizing the threat she poses. It's the professional recognition of an unfortunate situation with a tragic outcome. While I initially felt sadness from a clinical perspective, I would never prioritize her needs above my children's safety. Even with the restraining order, my nursing experience with similar cases makes me skeptical that legal consequences will deter her. Amelia reports that while Veronica no longer appears actively delusional, she spends most days crying about the extended separation from us. As a nurse, I recognize the improvement, but as a mother, I cannot risk exposing my children to someone who has demonstrated such dangerous behavior, regardless of how much guilt or pressure we face from family, especially with birthdays approaching. Warren apparently promised Veronica that, of course, she would see the children again once she gets better. A medically naive and inappropriate promise. Nathan thankfully intervened, reminding his father that this decision isn't his to make. We've been absolutely clear that Veronica will not have contact with our children for the foreseeable future, causing another emotional breakdown. We've been bombarded by flying monkeys from Veronica's church community. Several members called Ethan, insisting we shouldn't abandon Veronica in her time of need. He hung up on them. However, the church pastor met with Ethan privately and was surprisingly supportive, affirming that we're taking appropriate steps to protect our children. A validation that meant a lot to us both. We've already booked an extended vacation, which will keep us out of the country for several months. While relocating permanently outside the US isn't feasible right now. My nursing license and Ethan's IT contracts are all based here. We're definitely moving to another state. A fresh start is long overdue. To complicate matters further, my mother-in-law has returned from her extended travels abroad and is now harassing Ethan for details about the situation, attempting to position herself as the stable parental figure and grandparent, which is laughable given her previous absence. Oh, and I never did find my missing makeup products. I had to repurchase everything, which was frustratingly expensive on a nurse's salary. Update 5. I've received several messages asking for updates. And since you've all been with me from the beginning of this nightmare and provided so much support, I'll share the latest developments. I can't detail everything because it's emotionally draining to relive, but here are the highlights. By the way, I've started referring to my stepmother-in-law as Veronica rather than Smile. The new name feels more appropriate given the circumstances. About a month ago, Amelia FaceTimed me while helping clean Veronica's house. She discovered a suitcase hidden in their guest room closet and, curious, opened it to find a disturbing collection. Pieces of my clothing I hadn't seen in months. Shoes, brass, gloves, hair ties, and several bottles of my perfume. When Amelia questioned her, Veronica admitted to systematically taking my belongings, claiming she wanted to make things more familiar for Harper when she visited. Amelia specifically asked about my missing makeup from Mother's Day, but Veronica claimed she couldn't remember whether she took it, attributing her memory lapse to her mental state that day. So the mystery remains technically unsolved, though my nursing experience with patients in denial suggests otherwise. The whole situation is deeply unsettling from both a personal and clinical perspective. For several weeks after the incident, Warren bombarded Ethan with calls and texts, which Ethan wisely ignored. We later learned Warren would call whenever Veronica was having a particularly difficult day, trying to convince us to allow at least a FaceTime session with the children. Thankfully, Lucas and Harper have adjusted remarkably well to the situation. After a developmentally appropriate conversation explaining why they wouldn't be seeing these grandparents for a while, Lucas hasn't asked about or appeared to miss Warren or Veronica. From what we've heard, Veronica is making steady progress in therapy. She's no longer actively delusional, though she clearly still has significant issues to work through. As a healthcare professional, I might almost feel proud of her progress if she weren't simultaneously causing us so much distress. She and her church community have convinced themselves that my actions are unnecessarily harsh and vindictive, that I'm using this situation to deliberately isolate Ethan and the children from their family. According to Amelia, who has heard these conversations firsthand, they characterize me as thinking I'm better than them. The classic prejudice against my British background coming into play. They've actively tried to rewrite history, claiming I exaggerated and manipulated Veronica's unfortunate breakdown to create my own demented narrative. In their revised version, I've cruelly separated Veronica from her beloved grandson and beautiful granddaughter within weeks of arriving in the family. Every couple of weeks, I receive calls from mutual acquaintances asking if the latest rumors are true. These include allegations that I cheated on Ethan and convinced him to move to avoid living in the same city as my supposed lover, or that my departure has nothing to do with Veronica, but stems from my own psychological shortcomings that I'm projecting onto her. As a mental health professional might say, the projection is coming from the other direction entirely. When Veronica and her friends discovered we were planning to move, inevitable since one of her church friends lives in our neighborhood, they had a complete meltdown. Amelia reported the following conversation. Veronica, she's taking this too far. I understand I made mistakes, but moving to another state? Wait, is she planning to take the children back to England? She can't do that. Nathan, I don't think you have any say in that decision, Veronica. Veronica, I am still their grandmother. She can't do this. To be clear, we have no immediate plans to relocate to the UK. The timing isn't right professionally for either of us, though it wouldn't matter if we did. She still wouldn't have access to our children, regardless of which continent we're on. Most recently, Warren and Veronica decided to take a lovely trip to London while vacationing in Europe, apparently hoping to track down my family there. The irony of these medical professionals behaving so irrationally wasn't lost on me. Fortunately, thanks to everyone maintaining strict confidentiality about our whereabouts, they missed us entirely. We were actually in Asia, on a much-needed vacation. That didn't stop Veronica from trying to contact my sister, asking for her address to stop by and catch up. My sister, who's far less diplomatic than I am after years in hospital administration, gave her a stern warning that made it clear further contact would not be tolerated. We're heading back to the States soon, and I'm bracing myself for whatever new level of drama our return might trigger. Update 6. I know many of you have been following this saga of Veronica, my stepmother-in-law who became obsessed with my daughter. A comprehensive update on all the recent craziness is overdue and coming soon, but I wanted to share a particularly disturbing discovery that just came to light. Remember during Veronica's breakdown when she broke into our house on Mother's Day, and I mentioned my makeup mysteriously disappeared? No one ever addressed that detail again in the midst of everything else that happened. A few weeks ago, I was back in our former state, finalizing some paperwork and attending my good friend's engagement party. Interestingly, Veronica had been close friends with my friend's mother before all this began. After witnessing how distraught I was during the crisis, my friend's mother revealed that Veronica had been spreading vicious rumors about me having an affair, claiming that was the real reason we were moving. Disgusted by these lies, she cut ties with Veronica completely. Despite this falling out, Veronica apparently felt compelled to send a congratulatory gift basket for my friend's engagement. Curious about its contents, I asked my friend what she received. She brought down the basket to show me. What I saw sent chills through me like nothing in my nursing career ever has. The basket contained brand new versions of everything Veronica had stolen from me. The exact foundation that had disappeared. The same bronzer, identical lipstick shades. Particularly strange, since my friend has a much paler complexion than mine. There was even a matching lingerie set, hair accessories, and my signature perfume. To say we were disturbed would be a massive understatement. My clinical training in psychiatric nursing helped me recognize this as a deeply troubling behavior pattern, far beyond simple spite. It represents a level of fixation that continues to concern me professionally. Perhaps the most unsettling part is that this incident, as bizarre as it is, actually represents one of the less alarming developments of the past 2 months. I'm hesitant to share the rest because it sounds like something from a psychological thriller rather than real life. But I'll update you all soon enough on the continuing horror show that this situation has become.